what you're all thinking. How can we find new and interesting ways to torment people in 2021? G'day everyone, I'm Michael Russo and welcome to Baseline. The low bar of opinions, talking dribble, wondering out loud and with a verbal diarrhea should flow quite freely. It's an opinion show with a slight twist. The boss and production team are looking for insight, intelligence, rational conversation. What I'm aiming for, irreverent humour, potty language and a little bad behaviour. So let's put on a lab coat, chloroform the subject matter, put it to the chopping board, pick up a scalpel and see what makes it tick. See you in class. So here we are. We look back on the year that's been and think to ourselves, 2020, you can it off. As we cautiously look forward to 2021, I think it's natural for us to be a little bit apprehensive and wonder what the year ahead could possibly have in store for us all. New, highly contagious mutant COVID strains, a walking corpse in the White House running the free world.
I promise you, the president has a big stick.
We choose truth over facts.
Think about it. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men and women created by you know the thing.
Barack and I think it's a right for people to have bad health care. I learned about roaches. I learned about kids jumping on my lap. And I've loved kids jumping on my lap.
The cancellation of a national holiday by the virtuous woke. After the curveballs that have been thrown our way in the last year, who the hell knows what's going to happen in the next 12 months? Maybe an old cliche, the alien invasion.
The view from here is the same as yours, Jim. A giant head has entered Earth's gravity, triggering climate change and natural disasters we thought were impossible for at least another 8 years.
Let's not make this political, Terry. Do we know what this giant head wants?
Show me what you got!
Time to go, Morty.
Where?
The Pentagon.
Now we're all aware that government excels at two things. Looking at or ignoring problems that do exist and trying to fix problems that don't. Now, do you ever get the feeling that your individual rights and freedoms are slowly fading away? Those freedoms once enjoyed and taken for granted are now stupidly, heavily regulated, or just plain gone. That list painfully long. You know, the right to free speech, the right to freely farm your land, own and possess firearms, have certain religious, environmental, social, political point of view, or just exist on an internet platform. How about even that weekend away at the old beach hut? Even the right to self-defense has regulatory caveats attached.
Son, you have a right to refuse his order, and I guarantee you're gonna die if you touch me, and there's no afterlife. Everything just goes black. Don't do it.
Whoa, Rick! Okay, what was that?
Death.
What kind?
Instant.
Rules and regulations have been the cornerstone of human society for thousands of years, and we as a society follow those rules without much complaint. While somehow, those that seek to control always finding deviously new and interesting ways to submit new societal standards and take away what we hold dear. Telling the huddled masses, it separates us humans from the rest of the animal kingdom. But it's all for the greater good, right?
The greater good.
Otherwise, we would still be living in trees and under rocks, flinging poo at each other and poking the weird little monkey boy with a stick.
He's alive! He's alive! And yet we're still poking him.
But lately, there's been an accelerated increase in the restrictions and control by government and their faceless henchmen.
You need to file an inheritance petition.
File a quitclaim through Central Services, Section 918.
You need a title survey and gene print identification from Wilson Trust.
Now, you're all asking, where am I going with this? I'm talking about mission creep. Now, what's mission creep, you ask? The easy way to describe it is the old analogy of the frog in the slow-heating pot. The much more complicated way to describe it is the glacial paced march of an ever-increasing tsunami of usually draconian and unnecessary regulatory overreach with the well-thought-out logic that probably came out of the Acme Product Design Centre from the Roadrunner cartoon. So why is it that bureaucracy and government bodies keep moving the goalposts? Well, we all remember asbestos, leaded petrol and paint, cigarettes, the long list of agricultural, medical, household chemicals that have been removed from our shelves or heavily regulated for purchase because the data has changed and what we consider safe has been found to be detrimental to the people or the environment. Pretty ecological when you put it in that context. But what about when a change to the rules has no justification? So who implements mission creep? Is the implementation done from the top? Usually not. Ministers are all about the big announcement, the radical shake-up, the look of effective governance on big easy targets. How about frontline workers? Again, highly unlikely lower level public sector zombies, employees, not exactly bestowed with a great deal of authority and really only apply the rules. So how about those departmental heads? Perfectly situated between the minister and the zombie horde.
I'm going to check if the coast is clear.
Is it clear?
No.
How many?
Lots.
But whether it's a misguided, ill-informed or just plain hapless minister, an activist public servant or an overzealous departmental head, trying to impress his ministerial master, my point is that we've all experienced that one step too far moment that we either vent with a, "You've got to be kidding me," "Seriously," or my favourite gem, "That's just..." Another thing about mission creep is that it seems to strangely and disproportionately afflict regional areas and certain minority interest groups. Funny that. And if I wanted to join the tinfoil hat brigade and retreat to their post-apocalyptic command centre that is strategically located in the back corner of the yard and strangely looks like a garden shed,
I gotta put on my tinfoil hat.
Some of the people out there theorise that the government overreach can seem uncaring, intentional, and sometimes just plain sinister. I mean, could you imagine how quickly the backlash would be against the government, minister or public servant, if they managed to piss off a large percentage of the southeast corner of Queensland? I ask.
How can this be for the greater good? The greater good. Shut it!
On today's webcast, 2 of the 3 KAP members for State Parliament that are fighting the good fight and causing trouble for Emperor Swizzlestick, Pluckaduck. No, oh yeah, Palaszczuk. We have with us member for Hill, an all-round nice guy, Shane Knuth. Also from the KAP, someone like a fine bottle of scotch has gotten smoother with age, the man model himself, a member for Hinchinbrook, Dametto. And finally, former lawyer, now planner. She's not afraid to use an expletive or 10, has explicit language warning, but we don't know where it is, and we dare not ask. Kristy Gilvear. So, welcome all. And thanks for joining us today. All righty, we all know that what we're talking about here is mission creep. Kirsty, I'll start with you as a planner. What difficulties do you find with your job? I mean, do you deal with government departments?
Where do I start and where do I stop, Michael? We said the other day I could talk for hours about this and put people to sleep, no doubt. But look, I think the problem is just the layers and the amount of words that we've got in our system, and then trying to work your way through the layers and the words to get to an end objective. Even sometimes to prepare a quote for our clients, we're looking through tens of pages, if not hundreds of pages, just to figure out whether a particular project can be applied for or has any prospect of success if an application is to be made. It's complicated, it's difficult to explain, it's frustrating. It's not a fault of any of the individual players within the system, I don't think. I think it's just that it's become a bit of an amorphous animal, unfortunately. So at times.
Just with government, basically, it's the layers and layers. It's making viable projects unviable. I mean, I've looked into it with some things with agriculture as well. How do you work? Do you do a workaround, or is it just that the legislation just won't let you do it, or won't let people expand business operations?
As we were saying before, and we spoke about a couple of weeks ago, Michael, quite often projects just won't proceed. And look, it might be one thing for a small business to decide not to expand or open in a small town, but in a small town, it mightn't seem like a big deal to someone sitting in a larger centre, but in a small town, that sort of thing can have a flow-on effect in terms of employment, in terms of opportunity for those involved in the development. I think the impacts are probably a little bit greater in the regions and in the smaller areas than what they might be in our larger centres. The one-size-fits-all model in our planning system and in our regulatory system around land use and land management may not work in all situations. Again, I appreciate that it's a bit of a moving feast and we're all trying to improve it, but it is concerning. It's complicated to us that use it every day. Then I worry about what chance an ordinary member of the public has to try and inform themselves and then work their way through that system. It's a concern for me.
Well, actually, Shane, while I'm thinking about it, I mean, like, your state government's over getting towards $100 billion in debt. Government's not letting us increase the pie, for revenue. So how do we get around this problem? I mean, business has got to grow for the state to actually increase their revenue.
Well, look, with Kristy, she deals with the micro side of it, whereas that she's dealing with the nitty-gritty daily issues. As a state member of parliament, we're dealing with the broad scale of policies that are brought in that further flow on right through to the micro side to it. And I'll give you an example of when we left school. We had jobs in the railway, we had jobs in the meat works, jobs for Ergon Energy, which was Norcab at the time, and there was always local industries that provided jobs for the region. Right now, it's probably the most important time ever in our history that we need to rely on agriculture, and yet that we have constantly seeing impediments brought in. And back in 1999, I was there at the march down there at Whitton when Peter Beattie introduced vegetation laws that took away the rights to manage their land. 2004, we had removed the freehold rights. In 2006, there was the Wild Rivers legislation. And then in 2009, we had what they call the ERMPs, which is the Environment Risk Management Plan that was introduced, that if a landowner, whether it was a farmer or a grazier, didn't fill out forms properly, they had the potential of getting a $75,000 fine if they couldn't refused to fill out the form. There was a potential jail sentence. And so this has crept up to us, onto us over the years. And back in 2015, we had the vegetation management laws. Back in 2018, we had the reef runoff laws. And there's one thing after another. And we talk about what we've got here is a $16 billion industry. This is what's providing the jobs. And Farmer said to me today, he said, Shane, we had to deal with all the restrictions in regards to getting employees for COVID. And but the biggest issues that we do face is all the laws that the government has brought in, that we put food on the table, we put good food, we put food on the restaurants, and yet we are treated like criminals. And for this day and age, what the government has to do is value our farmers and make it provide them incentives where they can create jobs, do their work, and do what they do best, and that is provide that good food to us. And in the end, it's a big return back into the Queensland economy.
Yeah, well, I mean, when you talk about consultation, I mean, I've sat in on, parliamentary inquiries and things like that for farming, which is my other job. I was actually at one that Nick was at, that he actually forced his way into. And I listened to the questions that those parliamentarians were asking that were from the Southeast. And they were asking the questions, the way they were asking it was basically to get the answer that they wanted. Now, we're talking is basically death by 1,000 cuts. I mean, how do you grow revenue if you can't apply for it? I mean, look what happened with Adani. It took 10 years to get off the ground, and they were only picking and screaming.
Isn't that funny though? And we're seeing this even with little small projects in the Hinchinbrook electorate, where, say for example, we're trying to dredge Dungeness and we're trying to build a rock wall to recreate the historical spirit of Dungeness. But what keeps happening is the Department of Environment and Science goes, can you just do a study and try and satisfy this part, and then we'll look at the application once again. So you jump through that hoop and you say, well, we've got this report that says we're not hurting the environment if we do X, Y, Z. Then you go, oh, you're almost there. Now jump through this hoop. just what happened with Adani. The same thing happened with Adani. And for 10 years, they jumped through the hoops all the way up to some black-throated sparrow right at the end. But you know what got it over the line? Political will, political intervention from the minister and the premier at the time to push that project through. So the departments will come up with continual creative ways to say no to you if the department has an idea that project shouldn't go ahead. But unless there's political will, and that's what Shane and people like myself and other people that are trying to get these projects over the line, that's our very important position. We're trying to force the political pressure to get the state government to say yes on a lot of these projects.
Well, I mean, Queensland's actually a unique animal where it doesn't have an upper house for review in any legislation. So basically, so long as you hold power, you've got the right to do whatever you damn well please. Do we have to look, and I hate throwing more politicians at a problem, but do we have to look at something like a house of review for any new legislation? Or do we have to put sunset clauses on the legislations that we've got between that a problem? They're just working with legislative guidelines.
I think I have to be, I'm too young to be too cynical, Michael, so I've got to think that everybody in the system's trying to do the right thing.
Go on, be cynical.
I do think that genuinely we all have a driver to see that what we're leaving for our children and for our children's children is going to be, they're going to have enough to eat, they're going to have a place to live, they're going to have a job to go to, and they're going to have a school to go to. So I got to think that that's our, in terms of your core human, in Australian society, that's your core human desires as a person. I got to think we're looking at that. But it feels like we've lost our way. I feel like it's so bloody complicated that we all just get so disengaged. It's too hard.
Kristy, can I just speak to that for just a second? So what I've noticed is you talk to people in Brisbane and they don't hate us. They just don't understand us in North Queensland. They don't get us. They think we're up here trying to destroy the place. And I truly believe some of these bureaucrats that have never left the southeast corner to understand what we're trying to achieve up there in North Queensland are actually sitting there thinking to themselves, I'm doing the very best thing for the environment here by saying no to this project. I'm doing the very best thing by prolonging this so we stretch this out so it doesn't happen. I think they truly believe they're doing the right thing. I don't think they're bad people. But if you get on a plane and you travel 1,000 kilometres north and you have a look at the vastity of what we're trying to develop, have a look at removing a couple of trees or a bit of mangrove bush to open up the floodgates at the Mandam area isn't going to collapse the environment. It's actually going to improve the ecosystem. I think a lot of those people would start making a few different decisions. Now, I'm not here to just stand on my soapbox and advocate for a separate state of North Queensland, but I think a lot of that's that is born out of pure frustration because the regulations in southeast Queensland should not be applying to North Queensland because we're completely the opposite ends of the development scale.
Unless something changes dramatically, it's going to continue to be a problem, and then it'll get to be a harder problem if we start having a disconnect between our rural townships and our regional centres. At the moment, there's a little bit of a connection with our regional centres and our rural areas, but it is concerning to watch. I don't want another state. Just quietly, I think we've got enough.
Actually, while we're touching on that subject, Shane, when you've got 73 or 70 seats, like within 150 kilometres of Brisbane city centre, I mean, how do you govern for the rest of the state? I mean, you could literally hold the southeast corner and govern.
Michael, this has been a very important issue in regards to the frustration out there. A lot of it comes from the north in the sense of two areas. One wants a North Queensland state. The other is definitely to bring back the Senate. And it is quite frustrating that we see in Queensland's the only state in Australia that doesn't have a Senate to scrutinise legislation as it goes through the lower house. Back in 2009, we had a redistribution and we saw 4 seats removed in the central Queensland area to the North Queensland area. Those seats were abolished and actually those seats were then placed down there in the southeast corner. And the frustrating thing was back in the recent redistribution in 2018, what we saw was, and this is why the KHP had actually pushed this, we pushed for 4 more members of parliament. And it's a ridiculous thing to ask for more MPs. But if we did not push for 4 more MPs, we would have probably lost 3 MPs here in North Queensland. And those extra seats would have been created down there in Brisbane. And there is a sense of frustration. Yes, we have to do our job as members of Parliament here in the North Queensland. We have to take the views, the issues, and powerfully fight, for our constituency down there in Brisbane. But trust me, it gets frustrating when you see vegetation laws, reef runoff laws that are introduced into Parliament as a vote-winning exercise down there in Brisbane, rather than and that's where the politics come into it, rather than good policies that really, make an impact for our region. And, we've said this before, a simple suggestion or solution that we have put through the Parliament is that we've got an organisation, Indigenous organisation in Babinda called Jarragan, who works with farmers, works with community organisations to help, with water quality, in the Russell River catchment. And it's the first time we've seen environmentalists, Indigenous groups, farmers working together to get a good outcome of land management and water quality management in that region. But if you put that to the government to say, hey, this is the best option that we can take, and let the catchment groups make the decision about reef runoff and water quality, and also river river erosion, give it to the catchments. Don't get a government department to put a big stick, upon landowners, who are doing a great job of providing these jobs and providing this food. Don't put a big stick over them. Let the region make the decisions rather than big government.
Back to talking about mission creep. I mean, like I've looked at, everything from 4-wheelers, to, like I said, my pet peeve is my pet project is always firearm legislation. I'm just gunning that. But I said on 4-wheelers, I mean, you look at the, they literally, essentially banned it from Australia, and the major manufacturers have said basically, we're not changing our design. I mean, these things are extensively tested, and when you look at any accident that happens, and I've had a couple on 4-wheelers, and on reflection, the 2 times that I had those accidents, I mean, I was definitely doing something silly at the time. So, how do you legislate against stupidity? I mean, that's basically what is it government's just got a fear of risk aversion, or they're just trying to protect everybody from everything? Nick?
We did a fair bit of work on this, and this wasn't legislation. It was actually a change of the Australian standard at the federal level. And let me put this into perspective for you. Out of all the 4-wheelers or quad bikes manufactured worldwide, Australia was 3% of the market, the world market. So 3% of the world market said, Mr. Yamaha or Mr. Honda, you've got to change the way you completely build this 4-wheeler if you're sending it to Australia. And they went, hang on a sec. So you're saying 97% of the world's got it wrong when it comes to 4-wheeler design and safety of these things. We say put a helmet on. We say no pillion passengers. Get out there and just use the machinery in an area where it's fit for purpose. And the Australian government said no. We've had people like the Queensland Farmers Federation and the Australian Farmers Federation putting pressure on us, lobbying on behalf of doctors. People that have unfortunately lost loved ones. But you've got these lobby groups that sometimes, I think they take up fights just to stay in the fight. And they get the ear of government, or they get the ear of regulators or politicians that, I guess they want to do the right thing by people as well. Someone comes to them with a story where their son's been killed in a 4-wheeler, or their grandfather passed away by a 4-wheeler rollover. So they've got this feeling that they need to do something. Unfortunately, in Australia at the moment, we've got an issue where everything seems to be a knee-jerk reaction. Something happens, something needs to be changed. And all of a sudden, we're ending up with layers and layers of regulation and legislation where we can't move eventually, or we're wrapped in cotton wool. I say what needs to happen is we've just got to take a little bit more responsibility for ourselves sometimes. Use the piece of machinery or the 4-wheeler that's fit for purpose in the environment that it was set up to be used in. Unfortunately, though, we've adopted this way of life in Australia where we are trying to cotton wool ourselves to the point where we won't be able to do anything soon. And that's not the kind of Australia I want to live in.
Well, I mean, you can't protect everybody from everything all the time. It just won't happen. No.
Michael, I have a four-wheeler, and I use it, for working on my property, and basically getting from A to B and carrying things. But I just want to say that I feel sorry for the Australian farmers over this because, as Nick was saying, there's 3%, of the world, world's, population that buys, four-wheelers is here in Australia. So the makers, the manufacturers are not going to, fit all this safety gear as a result of 3%. But I had 3 years ago.
But Shane, I mean, the thing is that you got to remember these manufacturers are they're the world leading experts in bike manufacturing. I mean, the Australian government should be taking the advice from the manufacturer. I mean,
that is correct. And they should be taking the advice. But it was interesting. I actually hired a car and I travelled down to the Gold Coast using the Southeast Freeway. And I've been, hit with a number of issues that have popped up in my electorate. When I drive my four-wheel around the property, that is nowhere near a comparison of, driving down the, Southeast Freeway heading towards the Gold Coast with thousands of cars around you. I'd have to say that it'd be 1,000 times more dangerous, driving that car on the southeast of the Gold Coast than what it is driving my four-wheel around. And this is the frustration. Are we seeing this, this regulation creep into our lives, and it's constantly interfering in everyone's lives. That's making it more difficult every day.
I mean, I mentioned in the monologue about even like kiddies trampolines. Nick, you and Jared Blythe thoroughly entertained me a few months ago when you decided to stand up in Parliament and take the piss out of everyone when it came to gel blasters. I mean, do you want to have another crack at it, or?
Yeah, and Kristy, I'm probably going to offend you here, and maybe a few lawyer friends out there, but I see a lot of this risk-averse stuff is being born out of someone hurts themselves, and it's all good until, either the child ends up with a disability, or mum gets really annoyed that, or dad in some facts gets really annoyed that the kid hurt themselves. And I think what we've adopted, I guess through the legal system as well as what we've seen worldwide, is this: it's always someone's fault. Now, unfortunately, that leads to then a company going, oh, hang on a sec, I need to protect myself from being sued at a later date, because what would a reasonable person or what would a reasonable company do after an accident's happened with one of your pieces of machinery or equipment? And I guess not lawyers, but politicians then start being risk adverse as well, going, hang on a sec, we need to be seen to be doing something as well. So we've got to get out there and change a regulation or an Australian standard on this. So all of a sudden, everyone's trying to beat each other to doing something good out there, to the point where here we are. We got a trampoline that looks like it's wrapped in I get like you were saying, an MMA cage with springs that you can't hurt yourself on and padding that you'll never touch. And I guess that's now crept into this scenario with the gel blasters. Now, I'm in two minds of that. Yeah, we've got people out there that saw these gel blasters out on the street that looked quite lifelike, and felt scared and felt that there needed to be something done about that, because they were calling police stations going, I think someone's got an M16 or an out on the main road there waving around.
But you said this, and this is my point about trying to stop. If I saw a kid walking down the street with an AR platform or an AK-47, I mean, there is no way that I would think that gun would be real. It's
exactly.
Just like, I mean, and like, me as a firearms owner, I'm pretty versed in what a real gun looks like. I actually have Category D firearms for prime production, and they do not look like that. But like I said, I mean, I'm not an expert, but I see it.
So
I see it.
The funny thing is, Michael, the firearms that these gel blasters look like have been made famous by Hollywood, and people that have watched movies believe that's what firearms look like. That's what the bad firearms look like. That's why you got people with a .22 long rifle now with an AR sort of chassis in certain states being told that they can't have that because it looks scary. Just because something looks scary doesn't mean it is. But that's how we've been trained by the media, and that's how we've been trained by Hollywood to think. If it looks like that, it's going to cause a mass murder.
Well, and that's my point. I mean, it's a toy. It's a dangerous toy, but you can literally give a kid a bow and arrow, and I've actually seen relatives actually do that. And these things are more dangerous than a gel blaster by no stretch.
And there's a second point to what I was trying to say earlier about the two types of people out there. There's people that are genuinely scared of how these gel blasters look, and I guess
we'll
that's
call
how
them the bedwetters.
Yes, the bedwetters.
Yes.
But then you've got the other group out there that I truly believe don't want kids playing with guns because they don't want them to think that guns could be fun. They don't want to experience that there could be a sport out of this, and they don't want people in Australia owning firearms. And there's a group of people out there that would be happy if they took all the firearms off us tomorrow. Don't forget that for a second. Even though we use them for sport shooting, hunting, as well as pest control on our farms, there's a group of people out there that believe we don't need them. And they're the kind of people out there, I believe, that are trying to introduce these laws to make it harder for children to familiarise themselves with gel blasters and then perhaps move on to using firearms in sport or out on rural property.
It's really unbelievable how far we are going in the sense of the political correct and using whatever excuse possible to ban our sort of recreation and the what we do and our way of life.
Okay, so some days I literally am lost for words on the things and lost for words on basically the ridiculousness of some of the things that they come up with. I mean, literally, it's a toy, people, get over it. But anyway, I've just been informed that we've been on for a really long time, so we better wrap this up. I'd like to thank Kristy and Nick and Shane for giving up their time. Nick for on holiday in Tasmania, giving up his time. You have to thank Alicia for me for letting me have you for an hour. Shane and Kristy, it's been a pleasure. I hope to talk to you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would like to thank my guests, Director of Gilvear Planning, Kristy Gilvear, also KAP members Shane Knuth and Nick Dametto for graciously giving up their time and coming on the first ever episode of Baseline. Also a big thanks and shout out to Fallon, Claire and Tiffany, our awesome behind the scenes production staff that made this possible, and a huge thank you to Sari Hooten for giving us a little creative latitude and having the faith to let us do what we do. Now if you like what you've seen, please subscribe, like and share on all the socials. If you're going to put in a comment, please be polite about it. And finally, if you operate a business in the Babinda, Innisfail, Tully, Mission Beach, Carville, Hinchinbrook and surrounding areas, please keep your advertising dollars local and support us by advertising in and purchasing your independent, community-minded, locally owned and operated regional paper, the Wet Tropic Times. I'm Michael Russo, and thanks for watching.